Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Drawing Expressive Eyes using pen and ink. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is an ongoing drawing and painting class brought to you by Michaels. And we are doing a bit of a series on using the planes of the face to draw the features of the face this summer, or that's what I have planned. So we did a class a few weeks ago on drawing the eyes using the planes of the face, using chalk pastel pencils and a little bit of charcoal and graphite. And tonight we are drawing expressive eyes, so kind of continuing on with the eyes. And then next month in July, we're going to be drawing the nose, also using the planes of the face and a variety of materials. And I've even got some pen and ink noses as well to go with that series in July. I just don't have those right in front of me. I think they're in this sketchbook, but I'm not going to flip to them. Anyway, and then later on in July, next month, we're going to be working with water-soluble oil paints to paint this lovely little mango study on a little canvas there. And then in August, we'll be drawing the lips, and you can register for all of those classes on the Michaels website where you found this class under online classes. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and we'll get started going over supplies. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. Also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. And if you follow my link tree, which you can find in my Instagram bio there on the little link that'll be listed on my profile. On my Instagram, you can see other things that I have going on, like I have an online draw club that I do independently, not affiliated with Michaels. And this Saturday in my draw club, we'll be drawing tree bark, so focusing on textures and drawing tree bark specifically. And then here are some of my business cards with some of my work using calligraphy ink, which is the main medium that I like to work in. Okay, so I'm deviating a little bit from the supplies on the supply list. So you use whatever supplies you have on hand that will work. Whatever pens you have will work. But I've got some Artist Loft brand pens here. I've also got some Artist Loft pencils and an eraser, a plastic eraser, and a kneaded eraser. And then I have this Cretacolor Sanguine pencil that we're going to use to do a bit of sketching of the planes of the face here. And then we'll be drawing on top of that. We'll do it a couple of times. We'll draw with the pencil underneath, and then we'll go in just with pen only, have a little challenge like that. And then I'm going to be using this illustration paper, this Artist Loft illustration pad. So that paper is really nice with pen and ink. And then I have provided reference photos for you. And if you are watching this recording later on YouTube, you can find the PDF with the reference photos in the notes under the YouTube video there. It will say see more and 3 little dots, and you click on those dots and it should open up all of the supply list, and then also a link to the PDF with those reference images. And usually whenever I provide reference images for a class like this, I will do this thing where I provide the same photos, but several different ways. So I've got the true color photograph there, and then I have a black and white version. So it's a little collage photo of these 3 sets of eyes. and then the black and white version. Then I turned the contrast up on the black and white version so that all of these value shapes are nice and big and obvious here, and that's going to be important for our sketching tonight. And then I inverted the photograph so that the black and white photograph so that all of the light is showing up dark and all of the dark is showing up light. So that is very helpful in seeing these value shapes. So the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to move this out of the way and put a fresh piece of paper down from this illustration pad. And you're welcome to sketch on some regular sketching paper first if you want to save this nicer pen and ink paper, illustration paper from the supply list. Okay, so if you missed the class a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago on, oops, drafting tables on a slant, so everything was trying to fall down there. You might want to go, if you're, just joining us and you're like struggling with just the basics of the planes of the face of the eyes, then you might go back and check out the class on drawing the eyes using the planes of the face that Issei dropped in the chat a little while ago, or if you're watching later on YouTube, you can search those keywords on YouTube, drawing eyes using the planes of the face. But stick around even if you missed that class, but that's there for you whenever you're done if you're really struggling with the planes of the face. But I'm gonna go over it a couple of times. So hopefully, but I just don't want to be redundant since there was so much of that in the class from a few weeks ago. So we're just building on that. And we already talked about how we've got all these convex and concave surfaces of the eyes. We've got areas where the skull, the bone structure is coming forward, and then areas where there's a recess. So here, if we were think about a skull, we've got the eyebrow coming forward. We've got the ridge of the nose coming forward. We've got the cheekbones coming forward. The side of the face is curved back. And then we've got this recess where the eye socket is. And then we've got our eye in there, which is rounded. So it's coming forward. And we went through and we really mapped out all of those various planes. And we're going to do that again today, but we're going to be focusing more on how we can capture this expression in the eyes as we're doing that. And I want us to all set a goal for ourselves that we're not worried about matching these photographs exactly and getting them to be identical to the reference image. Like if we compare the reference image and my drawings, I maybe didn't match them 100%, and maybe the mood or the expression isn't coming across perfectly, but just don't put that kind of pressure on yourself to have perfection here. We're just looking for some kind of emotion, right? How can we start to capture some kind of emotion with the eyes? So that's what we're focusing on tonight. And it really is all about observational drawing, noticing the planes of the face, these contour lines, and then the value shapes. And then you're really matching the particular value shapes that you're seeing when it comes to a more expressive eye like this, because how open or shut the eyelid is contributing to the emotion that we're getting from that person's eyes. The amount of the iris or the pupil that's exposed is contributing to the emotion or the expression that's coming across. And how much of the whites of the eyes, which is, related to how open the eyelid is or how closed the eyelid is. So it's really just about that. And then also the arching of the eyebrows. So we're really trying to capture like a movement and a gesture here. So having this understanding of those planes of the face are going to be really essential. Okay, so we're just gonna dive in. I'm not gonna start out slow like I did with the last one because like I said, I don't want to be super redundant here. And these are all, excuse me, pictures of my son, by the way. This is my now 8-year-old son. He just had a birthday a month ago. And he just does not know how to take a photograph without making some crazy face. And he cracks me up with his expressive expressions in photographs, and especially lately. So that's what all of these are, him just hamming it up. And all right, so we're just going to get started with this first one here. And with this one, we're going to use the Sanguine pencil, or that's the pencil I'm going to use. If you want to use a regular graphite pencil or any colored pencil that you might have, it's nice to use a colored pencil like this under pen and ink because we can easily erase. We also want to make sure we're using just the just drawing kind of on the surface of the paper so that it will be easy to erase. The more pressure you put on a pencil like this, the more it's going to dig into the paper and be harder to erase. But it is a pretty soft, this pencil is fairly soft because it's an oil pencil. So it shouldn't dig into the paper too much if you've got the same pencil as me. All right, so we're going to start general and get more specific here. And in general terms, I like to look at the value shapes. So we can scroll down to either, let's do this highly contrasted black and white one just to get the general shape. So we're going to start with all of the absolute black values on this value scale. So thinking about a value scale in terms of 0 to 10, 10 being the absolute black, 0 being the absolute white. And if all of that is brand new to you, I do have a couple of classes you can refer back to that Ilse can drop in the chat. One was on drawing 3-dimensional forms using contour lines, using just an image of some limes. That was from several months back. And that was actually the first concept ever covered in this series almost 3 years ago. But we redid that a little bit in December last year. And then another class on using these shading techniques that we're going to be using tonight with the pens. So we can drop that link in the chat as well. And that one was using pen and ink shading techniques. And Ilse can drop that link in the chat as well. Okay, so yeah, kind of building on concepts that I've already covered in previous classes tonight. So just let me know if we have those links for you to check out, or you can check them out if you're watching later on YouTube as well. Okay, so we're looking for the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So I'm looking for everything that's showing up like a 10 on the value scale here. And we're looking for the big general shape, not the not specific shapes yet. So I'm looking at the big general shape of the eyebrow. And if my lines are not showing up for you yet on the Zoom, just give me a second, I'll darken them up. And then underneath that, we've got a shadow that I would put maybe as a 5 on the value scale. And I like to think of other things that I might use to describe that particular shape because they're organic shapes. So like it kind of looks like a stapler to me right here, or it feels like an upside down boat. So rather than thinking about I'm drawing an eyebrow, think about just the shape that you're seeing. And then underneath that, we've got, let's see, what does that look like? Maybe just a cylinder that's turned on the side. Looking at this shape right here. And then beneath that, we've got this big shape for all the black of the eyelashes. It's a very organic shape. So, just looking at that general shape that we're seeing there. And we're not worried about proportions being exact or perfect. We're not worrying about any kind of perfection here. We're just lining up these weird organic shapes that we're seeing. Sometimes it helps to turn the photograph upside down and turn your drawing upside down as well, so that you can really focus on these shapes without getting too distracted and thinking this doesn't look like the eye, you know, and second guessing yourself. We're just going very general here and just looking at these organic shapes. So now I'm on the I just said I don't want to call it what it is because that can throw off the psychology of it, but then it's hard not to say that I'm on the eyeball here. But I'm noticing how these shapes line up with the other shapes that I already drew. And again, I'm not drawing anything specific. I know it seems like I am drawing something specific here because the eye is starting to come to life, but I'm trying to just draw the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. And in this highly contrasted image, they're very lumped together. So and if the shape is sort of open-ended and you know, doesn't seem like it has, like it's closed in, then just leave it open-ended, right? And then we'll come over here to the other eye, but again, just looking at the shapes of shadows that I'm seeing to guide me. And on this side, it's really in the dark because when I turned up that contrast on the photo, that shadow turned out, it lumped all these value shapes together. So there's a little less to draw over here, but there's like a little crescent shape. It might be easier to draw the light that you're seeing versus the shadowy shapes that you're seeing. I'm just drawing all, this looks like a big stretched out comma right here to me. And then I'm just double checking to see how those shapes line up to the shapes of the other eye that I already drew. And just for, since we've got both of them here, I want to make sure that they do line up a little better. Even though I said we're not going to worry too much about proportions. So I'm just looking to see where that little crescent moon shape of light lines up in relationship to this shape over here that we described. So they should be on the same line. Eyes are typically on the same line unless a person's face is highly asymmetrical, which most people's faces are highly asymmetrical. It's really rare to have a person whose face is symmetrical. So in the last class, when we focused on eyes, we only drew one of the eyes. And so in tonight's class, we're focusing on the entire set of eyes. So I can start to talk about asymmetry a little bit more tonight. And yeah, you have to notice what that person's particular shapes are in reference to the features of their face, because some people, if you're trying to capture likeness, and then definitely if you're trying to capture emotion and things like that, like we're doing tonight, then it's just all about how the structure and the proportions of that person's face. Everybody's face is different. There's no such thing as a perfectly proportioned face. And asymmetries are what give us those little idiosyncrasies, what make us look like us. So we have to make sure that we have those asymmetries in there where they exist. So an easy way to see, like, are these eyes on the same line, is to just hold up a pencil to the eyes and see if they're on the same line. You might be drawing somebody who on one eye is like a little bit higher than the other one. So it all just depends on that particular person. Okay, and at first I feel like I drew these a little too far apart, and then now I think I drew them a little too close together, but that's okay. I'm gonna just leave them like that. All right, so we got the general value shapes in there, the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. And then now I want to outline all of those, the elevational shift that's happening here. And with the class on drawing the eyes using the planes of the face, we talked about turning a two-dimensional circle into a sphere a little bit, and how, or like a cylinder, and how we have to pay attention to the perspective with which we're viewing a particular three-dimensional form. And I don't want to repeat all that, so I'm just going to dive in and start going for it with these planes here. And I'm just outlining the elevational curve. So along the ridge of the nose, there's an upward curve happening here. And we know that because we can see it curve up. We know that the light's hitting it more directly. So think about peaks and valleys on a map where at the tip of the mountain, the light's going to hit it more directly. So the lines will be a little farther apart on the elevation of a map when you get to the peak of a mountain. And then in the valleys, the lines are going to be closer together. But you want to notice where things starting to flatten out a little bit. And up here between the eyebrows is where it starts to get a little more flat. And then we have this curve over here from where the eyebrows are curved across the forehead. But let's go back to right here. We talked about the horizontal curve that's curving upward and towards us. But then on the vertical axis, it's going to follow the same path as the nose does. So on this side, it's kind of curving out and to the left. On this side, it's curving out and to the right. And then we've got a little shift right here where there's like coming down the side of a mountain on the side of the nose. And we can see that shape right there. And so we just have to imagine, like, is this like a cylinder? Is it more like a rectangular prism? Is it a combination of these things? And when we get to drawing the nose, we'll get more into like the whole shape of the nose. Because the nose it's kind of like, it's a pyramid, it's a rectangular prism, it's a bit of a cylinder, you know, there's a lot going on to the three-dimensional form of a nose. But for now, we just want to notice that little curve up and that ridge and how this like downward slope is happening. And these value shapes are following these contours. So it's, once you get the hang of where these contours are, it's pretty easy to notice how the shadows are following these same curves. So as we come down here, we've got another little downward slope, like on the side of a mountain. And we've got the perspective on this is such that it curves outward right here. But then, so we've got this like, yeah, this curve like this, or maybe like kind of curves both ways. Like maybe there's what feels like a curve in this direction right here, but then a curve in this direction right here. No, that doesn't look right. I like making it look like there's a weird tunnel happening here. So it's not quite that severe of a shift, but there is a shift in the perspective on this curve. I'm trying to find where it is, because you can see the eyelashes are kind of following. It's really more like this, like we can kind of follow that path that some of those eyelashes are taking. They're growing in a direction of the curvature of the plane of the face right there. So we can use those as our guide on that axis there. I'm kind of trying to force my own little lines on there, and it wasn't working out. So yeah, if we just look at what the eyelashes are doing, we can start to see that. And we might end up with a lot of lines in a lot of different directions. And then on the horizontal axis, I'm seeing a curve like this. So, I mean, we're really just trying to notice what the value shapes are doing and make sure that our value is following these curves. You don't have to have a perfectly mapped out, like, you know, what eyes would look like in Tron here, although it does look pretty cool to draw the eyes with those full contour lines like that. Okay, and then yeah, on the eyebrows, we can go ahead and put those in, noticing how those are following that curve as well. And we can start to press down a little harder on our pencil in these areas where it gets darker and fill these in a little more darker lines. Okay. And then now to the part where we're really starting to capture this expression here. So this is where we can start to refine these shapes because we went very general with our shapes. So if you're noticing, wait, I need a little bit more of the eyelashes to be moved up slightly. This is where we're really capturing this emotion, is these particular shapes that we're seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and refine these shapes above the eye, and then it's also how much of the eyelid is showing. So noticing like that deep recess that's happening, that deep shadow that's happening in between the fold of the eyelid, that can kind of indicate that the person is opening their eye a little wider. Because if that was a little more relaxed, that line might not feel so dark and shaded right there. And you know, it depends on the proportions of the person that you're drawing to, but it's all about the light. The light is telling you everything you need to know, folks. I'm just trying to carve a guided path to get you there. Okay, and this photo is a little blurry, so the iris is just a little blurry right here because the sun was probably moving a little bit when I took this photo. So if you can manage to capture that blurry movement, you'll capture even more expressiveness here because he's literally moving, right? So I'm looking at the particular shapes that I'm seeing in the center of the eye, on the pupil and the iris, and I can see a lot of it. I can see, you know, almost the entire top roundedness of the iris, which you're not going to see when the eyes are more relaxed, right? So putting all of those shapes in there. And then let's talk about the planes here. So we've got kind of a center line here that might feel more straight. And then we've got a curved line out to the right and then a curved line out to the left on that vertical axis. And then we can do like a cross of the horizontal axis, and then same thing, we want that to feel curved. So it's like a little globe here to indicate the curvature of the eye. And we want to make sure that the value that we're adding is following that curve. And we can make this line thicker, start to fill in some of those darker values that we're seeing there. I went way too far with these eyelashes, but that's okay. Doesn't hurt to exaggerate eyelashes a little bit. And just noticing the particular clump of the eyelashes. Last time we spent a lot of time talking about the pressure that we're putting on our pencils, and we're definitely going to talk about that when we start getting in here with the pen and ink more. So notice like if it is what the value is on that value scale from 0 to 10. And if it's like a 0 or a 1 or a 2, then maybe you don't you leave it a little blank there. You don't press down as much on the pencil here. And with the pen, we can do a same thing. We can switch the nibs of the pen that we're using to change the amount of value that we're putting on. But we'll get to all that in a bit. So I just want to make sure I'm illustrating all of the planes here. This is going to be very helpful as we start to add the pen and ink. So think about this like kind of fountain of, it really frames the eye here and how the skin is curving around the bone structure of the side of the face there. And you can just observe, that there's like a curve forward happening, and then the photo gets a little cut off. So we're just going to leave it right around there. But you can see how it's this shape that's coming off underneath the eye creates the shadow here, and those lines follow those contours. Okay. And then we can just fill in some of this value if we want here, like go ahead and fill in the darkest dark of the pupil, etc. And then you can leave it mostly blank where the reflective light is in the eye, or you can erase it out. But really, I want this first sketch to just be about understanding the planes of the face, understanding these value shapes, and we're going to build on this throughout the class. All right, and then to this other eye, we outlined all those big shapes in the highly contrasted photo, but now we can see a little more detail in the true light photo, and we can see how the skin is like very stretched right here because of how the eyebrow is arched up in this express. So it really changes. It's like the expression is really coming more from this side of the face, which some people, are really good at kind of winking and scrunching up one side of their face, but not the other. So that's definitely what's happening here. The skin right here is stretched up, and you can see this line is kind of stretched and curving up in this direction. This shape is definitely affected compared to the other side. But then following those contours, we can see this upward curve. And the more you practice this, the easier it becomes to see these shapes. Sometimes I know people get a little lost and frustrated when I go a little quickly through stuff like this because they're like, I'm just not seeing those shapes. And to that, I always say, I totally get it. It takes practice to just see them. So practicing drawing lots of different eyes would be a good way to start to see this variation in this bone structure and how the skin gets stretched and in different expressive ways. All right, so I want to do the same thing over here and notice how this curve is being affected by the expression on the face here. So, and how much is visible. So we might need to really adjust some of these shapes here as well. You can almost see the underside of the eyelid where those eyelashes are. You can see again a lot of the iris. And it's pretty dark. I feel like something got away from me right here. Like, do I have an extra shape? So I've got the eye and then Oh yeah, I think I drew. I think I got a little lost in my shapes over here. And I think my eye drifted up a little bit where it's not on the same plane. Let me adjust that. Well, if you were pressing, if you did a similar thing, I always think it's helpful when I make a mistake like that and go ahead and fix it just to show you that it's better to erase something out when you catch something like that and make an adjustment rather than trying to force your drawing. But since I pressed down so hard trying to make my lines visible on the zoom, it's going to be a little tricky to draw it again, but I can do it. So my eyebrow just needs to come down more over here. And yeah, I really exaggerated some stuff over here. I'm gonna let these contours be my guide real quick here and go ahead and line up this underside of the eye a little better. Okay, and then we've got this curve. And we've got this stretched moment right here. Now I'm given definitely some crazy eyes happening on this one because of all of this erasing and drama. A lot of drama on this eye. But I think playing around with a drawing like this is really helpful. I've seen a YouTube or Instagram video of a person erasing out and drawing different expressions on the same drawing, which I just did by mistake. But how you just can see this various expression coming across by just that change in the shapes that you're adding and the change in the value. Okay, so I really just wanted to illustrate these contours, and I had to do it a couple of times there because my proportions got away from me. But hopefully that was helpful in seeing how just shifting those shapes can change the expression and how it's all about the light and the value here. Okay, so let's move on to this next set of eyes here, the next one down. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start with a pencil, but then this time we're going to go over our pencils with the pen and then erase out the pencil lines. And so we'll just have the pen. So with this second drawing here, that's what I did. And that way we can start to see how to add the value shading techniques with the pen and ink. And again, if this is brand new to you and you're like thinking this is a little too advanced, we had the class a few weeks ago that just talked about the planes of the face using the eyes, and I started out talking about basic two-dimensional forms like spheres and cylinders and perspective and on those things, and then moved on to kind of talking about the symbol for the eye that a lot of people get stuck on, and all that stuff would be worth repeating, except for we just did it in a class a few weeks ago. So I don't want to be redundant, like I said, but I'm seeing some comments popping up in the chat, like maybe I'm skipping over some stuff. And I'm definitely not. There's plenty of content out there from previous classes that you can go follow up on to support what we're doing here tonight. So we're building on some skills we've talked about very recently. And so yeah, with this next one, we're going to start with the same method, but then we're going to go over it with the pen and ink shading techniques. And I will briefly talk about those pen and ink shading techniques before we get started with them. But then again, I've got another class on that you can refer to if you've never used them before and you need to start out, just looking at a basic form like a piece of fruit. That's what that class is turning a two-dimensional form into a three-dimensional form using contour lines and these value shading techniques that we'll be using with the pens. Okay, so I'm going to start out pretty light with this pencil, and I don't know that my lines are going to show up quite as much, but I'm going to be doing the same thing that we just did up there with that last drawing. And I've also got these inverted light photos to help you if you're having a hard time seeing these particular shapes. So in the inverted light photo, they get a little washed out, and sometimes I think that can help because it lumps all the shapes together and then you can really go general to specific. So I'm going to actually start with that one on this second one here. So I'm looking at all of the things that show up bright white, and that's actually all the stuff that's pretty dark so that I can get that big general shape that's probably going to need to be refined of the eyebrow. Looks like a big horn there. And then the shape of the skin underneath. It's also being stretched a bunch in this emotive expression. So I'm really just trying to capture the very specific organic shapes of light and shadow that I'm seeing. So I know I'm on the eyelashes, but I'm trying not to call the eyelashes eyelashes. Also, there's a bit of like a diagonal, the eyes kind of going out on a diagonal here. So I can notice how, because of the expression, it feels a little bit diagonal. And I know it's really difficult to draw like this when we're drawing something like the eye. We talked about that a lot in the last class on drawing the eyes using the planes of the face. How it's really difficult when we're drawing eyes, especially or anything on the human face, to get away from these symbols or ideals that we have for what an eye looks like that are based more on our imagination than they are in observation. So if we let go of those symbols and we just look at what we're actually observing, all of the information that we need is there. It's so interesting when I say things like that. I hear myself and I'm like, wow, isn't that a great metaphor for life? Like, there's so many things in our lives that we get stuck on these narratives and these symbols and these patterns and these ideals or idea of things. And it's like, if we just observe facts, what we can observe with our own eyes, all the information that we need is right there. All right, so I'm on this other eye here and everything in this inverted light photo is really washed out. So all I drew was the particular shapes and I'm starting to see the eye coming across already. But then this one over here is like really lumped together. So, but what's going to help me is to line up where is this particular shape in reference to these shapes over here. And I'm just trying to get them to be in a similar place. And then we can switch to, you know, the true light photo here and start to refine some of these shapes, or maybe go to the black and white one here that's highly contrasted next. And yeah, so if you just completely ignore all the brain chatter, because that's really what it is. It's like all the wheels are spinning and all the, you know, all these things are going off where you're like thinking back to all the things that you've ever seen or known about an eye, right? And a lot of that is your imagination of an eye or your symbol of an eye. And if you just ignore all of that brain chatter that's going on and all that voice in your head that's telling you that's wrong, and just draw the shapes of the light and the shapes of the dark that you're seeing. And actually, I am going to try this. Let me see if my camera won't flip it. I'm going to flip it upside down for a second. So I'm going to draw these shapes upside down. So I'm looking at this one, right? Like, no, wait, yeah, this one. Yep. Okay, so I'm just looking at these shapes and I'm trying to line up those shapes in relationship to the shapes I'm drawing upside down. So my paper is upside down, my drawing's upside down. I'm just looking at the light shapes. And this is a great way to shut off that voice in your head that's telling you that's wrong or that doesn't look right, or, you know, whatever, this is too hard. And I'm just looking at the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. You could even take one of these other photos and invert them yourself on your device if you know how to do that, because I inverted the highly contrasted one, so that definitely washed it out there. Okay, so now that I've got all of those shapes in there, I can kind of double check them to see that they line up. I'm putting my son's freckles in there too because they're cute, and I did it on the last drawing, so why not? Okay, so I can see like, where are these little triangles that are coming off, and so I'm trying not to call them eyelashes. Where are those in relationship to the little triangles sticking out over here? And they definitely are not on the same line. There is more of a diagonal happening here. So like just lining up the eyelashes, I've got more of a diagonal line. So I'm looking for a bit of a slanted line right there. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it back around, but that's a very helpful trick if you're struggling with those shapes. Okay, so we could add all of those contours in there, and I am going to do it. I'm just going to do it really lightly because I want to make sure I can erase my line. So I'm just noticing where this curve is here. Where is this curve here? Maybe I'm not going to put them in there so detailed, but just getting the general idea of where those contours are can be really helpful for when we start to add the pen and ink on top, because all of the pen and ink is going to follow these contour lines. And the only reason I wanted to do the like Tron eyes, you know, extremely on that last one is just to get you to notice where these curves are. I'm not expecting anybody to be like, you know, 100% grasping this. I just want you to get the general, I mean, it would be cool if you were, but if you're not, like, just getting that general understanding of like, this is three-dimensional, it's not flat. And so how do we make it not feel flat? And so making sure that our value and is following those curves is what's going to make it not feel flat. And also another aspect of all of my classes that I like to kind of pride myself on is I'm hoping to give you some tools that you can put in your tool belt that you can carry forward and draw any sets of eyes with. You know, I don't want it to be like we all just draw these eyes together and everybody follows along, but you don't understand how to draw eyes, you know, with a new drawing with a different reference photo that you might have. So I'm hoping to like really get the concept across. But if that doesn't come across fully, all I really want you to get is this like general three-dimensional curve, like that we need things to feel spherical around the eye. We need things to feel sort of cylindrical up here at the top of the, and then we need to see where these different cylinders might be stretched and curved around as well. And then our value is going to follow these same curves. So we're going to go very minimal with our value in just a moment here. And it's gonna hopefully not take much to make these eyes come to life. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're doing pretty good. We just have one set of eyes left after this. Okay, so let's use the smallest nib that we have in our set. So for me, that is a 0.01 in the Artist Loft brand. I also have a 0.03 here and got a 0.05. I got a lot of really small nibs. Okay, I'm going to go to a separate page for just a moment and go over these value shading techniques real quick. So with your smallest nib, and I linked that other class on using these shading techniques. So we've got hatching, which is just one directional lines that overlap until they get to make darker values. So with this very small nib, I just have to keep overlapping hatching lines, and they're going to follow those contours to make something look three-dimensional. So the more I overlap them, the more pressure I put on the pen and overlap them, the darker that value becomes. And then I could kind of blend out by overlapping in a way that starts to blend it, right? And then for a lighter value, I'm spacing my lines out, putting less pressure on my pen, okay? And then cross hatching is the same thing, but we are using multiple directional lines. So we've got the hatching lines, and then we can go a different direction to turn them into cross hatching. We might go diagonal, horizontal, doesn't matter. We can use all of them, but we're overlapping to get to a darker value. We can also switch to a thicker nib to get a darker value to happen. So if I use my bigger nib, I'm going to be able to fill in to a solid black a lot faster. I'm going to be able to, you know, get those black values to happen faster, but we're going to use a pretty small nib for a lot of this eye, except for the really black parts. So we want to kind of blend out a little bit with a bigger nib and a smaller nib, and see how you can get that value to feel a little blended with some cross hatching there. Okay, and I didn't use stippling in this drawing, but you are welcome to use stippling. Stippling, I mean, you can use any of these value shading techniques that you want, that you're comfortable with. But the next one is stippling. So it's just one dot at a time that is repeated until we get to a solid black, more spaced out to get it to be blended and to soften that value. And that one takes the most time and the most patience, but it's the easiest to control because you're just doing one dot at a time. And obviously with a thicker nib, we can overlap them a little faster and get it to be a darker value a little faster. So I'm using the Artist Loft brand pens here. I'm using a really small nib and a bigger nib. So I've got a 0.01. Oh, wait, like those can't both be the same. Oh, I've got a 1.0 and an 0.1. Okay, so again, that was hatching, cross hatching, stippling, if these are brand new to you. And I've got that class on value shading techniques that we dropped in the chat earlier that you can check out if these are brand new to you. And then scribbling. Oh my gosh, can I spell scribbling? I'm gonna have to scribble over it. And so that's just like it sounds, just scribbling or a random mark, but you're scribbling to fill in that value. You can use a smaller nib. I used mostly hatching and cross hatching on these eyes. So that's what I'm gonna stick with here, but you could always use the other shading techniques if you're comfortable with them as well. Okay, so let's get back to our drawing here. I'm gonna start with that really small nib. I might even start with an even smaller one than that. This 0.05 or 0.005 or 0.003, which are even smaller nibs here, because I think it's easier to start out. I mean, this is a preference. This is, you have to practice yourself to figure out how you feel about this. I feel like it's easier for me to start out with heavier pressure with a small nib and then slowly increase my pressure. I see somebody's asking, is scumbling the same as scribbling? Scumbling is a painting technique. That's how I know it to be a painting technique that you can use to kind of glaze or do like a dry brushing technique. But yeah, scribbling is just like it sounds. You're just scribbling to fill in those value shapes. Yeah, so I mean, as I was just saying that, I'm like, I go both ways. Sometimes I feel like it's easier to start out with heavier pressure and then let up on your pressure. And then other times I feel like it's easier to start out with light pressure and increase the pressure. So it's really up to you. But I find I can control what I'm doing if I start out with a really small nib in the darkest areas. And then I kind of build my confidence up to where I'm like, okay, yeah, this needs to get darker. And so then I switch to a bigger nib, but it feels low risk if I start out with this small nib in a really dark area. So I'm going straight for this darkest part of the eyebrow and I'm following my contour lines, and it gets pretty solid black in there in the eyebrow. So I can, build my confidence by going in with this small nib. And yeah, you use whatever materials you feel most comfortable with. Nobody's grading you. I'm not gonna, double check on anybody that they were using the exact same stuff as me. So definitely use whatever you feel most comfortable with. All right, so I'm just using some cross hatching on the eyebrows, starting to build up the contours that I'm seeing there. And it feels non-committal because I know it's going to eventually, I'm going to need a lot of layers right here. If I were to stay using this same small nib the whole time, then I'm going to have to put a lot of layers on here. But then I'm getting into some of the lighter areas of the eyebrows here. So that's where I'm kind of doing this little flick of the wrist. So I'm going to switch to my forward-facing camera for just a second and talk about something that really helps me to control my mark making with all my utensils, is to move my entire arm when I'm drawing. So think about the movement coming from your entire arm, not just your wrist. And so I'm kind of flicking my wrist, but I'm using my entire arm as I'm doing that. So my elbows kind of lifted up, and I'm really controlling the pressure that I'm putting on the pen because I'm using my entire arm right there. All right, and then now I'm going to get into this darker values. I just like to stick to the darkest areas first because, again, I'm kind of building up my confidence there. Also, one thing I left out, I was going to put that when I showed my daughter these drawings. She was like, "What's that? Why did you put that weird?" I was like, "Because there's a hair going in front of the eye," but I totally forgot to do that and leave it blank. And I was going to have a whole thing about when you're drawing with pen and ink, you got to plan ahead for what's going to be blank paper and leave it blank. But I'll admit I've gotten a little thrown off by some of the comments tonight. I need to stop looking at the chat and totally forgot to do that. But if you haven't drawn anything, like I already went through the eyebrows, so I can't really do it there. Maybe in the next one I will plan ahead for that. I mean, really, you just take account, like right now, if it's not too late for you to do it, you could erase it out in your drawing and just be mindful of the fact that, like, I want to leave it blank right there. Like, I want to leave it blank here underneath the, on the bottom lid, because it's so light in the photograph right there. And that really adds to the emotional impact of the eye there, to have that little bit of light that's hitting the bottom lid. So I'm definitely keeping in mind that that's going to be left alone and left blank paper. Oh, and I did put a little bit of stippling and scribbling in my eye here the closer I look at that drawing. Okay, so yeah, it's too late to put the hair in there for me because I already went over where it would go on the, well, maybe not. You know what? Because it is pretty black as it goes over the eyebrow, and then the light part of it is coming through right here. So let me maybe go ahead and just using my whole arm to get a really light. That's where I'm gonna leave it blank inside of there. And I can go ahead and swoop it up here. Okay, and yeah, with that being said, we can go ahead and do the same thing with this reflective light that's showing up in the eye. And we want those to follow the contours that we've talked about, that we've spent so much time talking about tonight. We want to make sure our value is following these contours. And you want to be confident that you got a sketch that's really strong, because then you're not really doing much else other than just filling in the value, and you've already got the guide with the contour lines there. I mean, it's really just going to draw itself, right? After all that effort we put in. So I taught a class for many years here in Austin called Ditch Your Eraser, Learning to Draw with Pen and Ink. And I always joked that the class should really be called Learn to Depend on Your Eraser Less, but that wasn't as catchy of a title. So I called it Ditch Your Eraser, but we definitely used erasers in the class. And it was just about getting comfortable with drawing with pen and ink in a sketching way, and not treating every permanent, just because it's a permanent mark making tool does not mean that you have to treat it like, you know, you can treat it like a sketching tool. You can be light and sketchy with it. And doing pen and ink drawings in pen only, like I'm going to do with this last one, if you want to join me and challenge me in just a moment on this last set of eyes that we're going to draw, we're going to use pen only. But even right now, I'm kind of going around with my little nib pen and just sketching in all of the darkest value that I'm seeing, all of that darkest value shape. And maybe let me go back to my true light photo so I don't make it too dark in here, but there's that pretty dark shadow, but I'm just going real lightly, real light pressure here. And then once I get all of that in there, I might go ahead and start to erase out these contours because I don't really need them anymore. And they're starting to distract me. And I want to just make the eye start to come to life. So and you can really just stick to this same small nib for the whole thing, like I said, because we're going to end up just overlapping a bunch to get to the solid black. You can, I think, really control what you're doing a lot more to do it that way. But if you get impatient and want to switch to a thicker nib, I might do that in just a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and fill in some of this lighter value first. And yeah, right here, maybe I'll do a little stippling or scribbling to get this to be a little lighter. And I like to just ignore everything that is super light on the value scale when I'm drawing features of the face in pen and just really add the darkest value that I'm seeing. So even in the darker values, I'm keeping my pen lines pretty light. And yeah, if you wanted to keep your contour lines there and not erase them yet, that's definitely helpful for right here. And we're doing really light value right here, like just a baby's breath of some value that follows these contours, really using that whole arm to keep my pressure super light right there. And use that scribbling technique inside of the iris a little bit. Maybe some more stippling. Oh my goodness, it's getting late in the class, y'all. Let me skip to a thicker nib here and jump to a thicker nib. Okay, so still following those contours as I fill in to make this feel nice and rounded. And yeah, by how wide the pupil is, how much of that big pupil is visible, definitely. Once you get this dark value going, this expression on the face should really start to come across. And then we've got all these angles and dramatic contours describing this expression. So the expression really is just coming across as a byproduct of matching all of these values and contours. All right, now come over here to this other eye. I'm gonna go in with the darkest, the bigger nib this time first, and put in all those big black shapes first. So whatever value shading technique you feel more comfortable with, like scribbling might be easier in here. And yeah, I'm leaving that little gap where I'm seeing, or actually I might just leave it all blank right there and just do the eyelashes. Minimalism is your friend when it comes to drawing with pen and ink, leaving things alone. Like you don't necessarily have to draw all those lines. I always love quoting. I know maybe not everybody has seen this movie since it's an older one now, but in Napoleon Dynamite, there's a scene where he draws a picture of a girl that he wants to ask out on a date, and he brings it to her and says, "It took me like 4 hours to get the shading on your upper lip." And she's like horrified. And I always like to joke, could have just not drawn the shadow on the upper lip. You can just leave things alone. We don't have to draw every shadow that we see there. Like we just want to make sure the shadows that we do draw are following these contours. And we're going to be able to capture this emotion. We're going to be able to capture this expression because we've paid such close attention to all of these value shapes and contour lines. So if we put our value in there in a way that's sort of minimal, but still following all these curves, then all that stuff should just come across as a byproduct of doing those things, like I said. Okay, that's pretty good. Go ahead and erase my drawing underneath. And I could definitely go darker in that other eyebrow, but I want to move on to this last one here. All right, so this is the one where we're really going to challenge ourselves to draw with pen only. And I know that feels scary, but again, we're just learning and practicing and doing our best, and taking risks can be fun, and sometimes you surprise yourself. So you can always do it on a separate piece of paper, on some scratch paper, I don't know, whatever you got to do to reduce the amount of risk that you feel about it. But I'm going to use this highly contrasted photo of this last set of eyes. And with this one, my son Jack is really looking up with his pupils. So his pupils are like completely eclipsed by his eyelids, and we're just seeing this like half moon of the iris and the pupil. So we're seeing a lot of the bottom underneath of the whites of the eyes right there. And then since it's highly contrasted, this is all one big shape here. So I'm going to start out just like we did before and use pencil first if you're not comfortable doing this. But mostly this is the plan I came up with because this is how I can get 3 eye drawings to happen in an hour and a half, is if I do one in pen only. And I find people really love these challenges, and sometimes you surprise yourself. Like recently I taught an urban sketching class, weekend workshop in person here in Austin, and I challenged everybody to just do, like, we went outside, and after doing several sketches in pencil and pen, etc., and like building up and then adding watercolor to them, I was like, now let's go outside and we're going to do just the watercolor sketches first. We're going to do, just paintbrush and watercolor and just try to capture, some big blobby shapes, and then we'll add pen on top of them. And every time I do that exercise in an urban sketching class, people love it. And actually in August, that's the plan for one of these Michael's classes is going to be some urban sketching tips and tricks. So we'll be doing a similar thing. Okay, so I'm just looking at these big blobby shapes. Scooch my drawing up a little bit here. And I know that's might be scary for some people, but again, you might surprise yourself, might be fun. You might, like my students of the urban sketching class with sketching with watercolor, you might love this drawing the best. It might have that loose, carefree pen and ink vibe you're searching for. Because I know that's what a lot of people are searching for when it comes to pen and ink drawing, as somebody who works primarily in ink and has been doing so for many years. Okay, I don't know that these eyes are on the right plane with each other. This might be crazy. Mine might turn out terrible. Maybe that'll make you feel better about your drawing. But we're just gonna go for it anyway. All right. It's going to be a surprise here because, yeah, mine don't feel like they're on the right. Like, what's going on here? We'll see. Okay. Now I'm going to start to put that. I'm going to switch to the true light photo. Start to add the value in there and see if my stuff matches up. And I forgot about that hair again. Let me see if I can still add that hair in. Oops, sorry. Switched down. See if I can leave a blank space for that hair. So now I can start to refine these shapes a little bit. And hopefully the eyes are going to be on the right line with each other. If not, like I said, it'll just make you feel better about your drawing if mine is completely off. And the other thing that I love about sketching with a pen only is that it's so challenging if you do make a line or a mark that you don't want to be there. You kind of just, what I do is I just bounce around in the drawing so that I don't get too bogged down in that one area and try to fix it too much, because usually the second I start trying to fix something is when I really mess it up. So I find that if I just move to a different area of the drawing and live with that mark that I didn't mean to go there for a second, then I can maybe figure out a way to camouflage it with some other lines, or just leave it alone. Sometimes just leave it there, and if you make the rest of the drawing so strong that you just don't even notice it anymore, that can be one way to deal with it. All right, let me switch to one of my thicker nibs. Yeah, I don't know that my eyes are on the right plane. I really just went for it, y'all. Yeah, that's not too bad. Like, they're a little lopsided, but that is okay for me. Still think I've captured the expression, even if they're a little off. All right, we are almost out of time. So I'm just gonna finish this sketch up a little bit more, and then I would love to see where y'all landed with your drawings in just a moment. So yeah, I'm trying to just make the rest of this drawing strong enough that you don't notice how lopsided these eyes are. I was like, we're almost out of time. I wanted to do it this way. Really should have taken my time to make sure that those shapes were lined up. But that is okay. Maybe it'll just make some folks feel better about their drawings if there's some lopsidedness to your eyes. I don't know, the more I get into, I'm like, they don't look that off. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Like, let me put my pen up to them and see, like, are they even lined up? Because he was on a slant in the last one. One eye was a little higher than the other. This is the face. This is like the ugh face. This is like, ugh, mom. The eye roll. We're looking up from under the eyelids. See, I've got a little moment here where I kind of messed up on this pupil and iris, and I'm just trying to camouflage these weird lines that I have in here. I think I did a pretty good job. And yeah, I probably should have shifted. If I could erase, I would just shift up a little bit on this side, but too late now. Gotta just deal with it. But the overall point of this exercise was to understand how to capture emotion and expressions. And I definitely think we covered that. And drawing like this in pen only, I think can really help to just build your confidence in your abilities to draw, to figure out troubleshooting, challenge yourself to troubleshoot issues like how to camouflage a mistake, etc. Builds your resiliency in your drawing practice. It's often so hard for people to deal with their drawings not turning out like they expected them to. So the more we can just recover from the fact that things just don't always turn out the way we want them to, and just keep going, find joy in the process. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with those. All right, we got 3 minutes left. I'd love to see how y'all's drawings turned out. If you want to hold up your work and Ilse can spotlight you. All right, there's Barbara. Oh, that's beautiful, Barbara. Yeah, I'm really feeling some emotion in all of those. Really nice work. Was that the only person? Or all right, this is Anita. Oh wow, look at that. That looks like some charcoal. Beautiful. Wow, look at those. Yeah, I'm really feeling that like wide-eyed look at the top and the look from underneath the eyelids on the bottom one. Oh, there's my friend Dorothy. Look at that. Oh, Dorothy, you really captured some emotion in that top one. I love your little note in the middle there. And Stephanie, really nice. Yeah. Yeah, I think even if it's not the exact emotion that we're looking for, just capturing some emotion in these is so nice. Yeah, look at that. I'm feeling some kind of mood from that for real. And it's just that like, that subtle shift in the planes of the face and the dramatic value really makes that come across. Oh, I love the soft blending you've got up there at the top, Diana. That's really nice. This is Josh. Yeah, that's really dynamic. Feeling some movement in that one too. I mean, that's the other thing we said we were trying to capture, right? Is the movement of the expression. Thank you, Pam, for that great feedback. Yeah, look at those. Yeah, same thing. I'm really feeling the mood or expression in both of those. Oh, it's a little blurry. It looks like a good one. I can't really see it. Okay, yeah, that's a really lovely one too. Well, thank you for all the lovely comments in the chat. Really appreciate all that feedback, y'all. Okay, so next week, I believe, is the first of those 2 classes on drawing the noses. I need to double check my calendar, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what's coming up. And then that I held up at the beginning of the class, and then we'll be doing the water soluble oils later in July. So looking forward to those classes, and hopefully you all can join me. And if you want to do more drawing with me later this week, sign up for my online draw club. You can find the link to that in my link tree on my Instagram, and we're going to be drawing tree bark this Saturday in that class. All right, thank you all so much. Don't forget to use those hashtags, Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes. If you post on Instagram, and Ilse just dropped the my Instagram handle at Adrian Hodge Art. So if you just go to Instagram and find me on there, go to my link tree, and that's where you can find all of the links to everything I've got going on right now. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening. Good night.